The Caine Prize for African Writing this year went to a writer duo, Mame Diene and Woppa Diallo, for their short story A Soul for Small Places. A Soul of Small Places follows the story of a little girl who is possessed by an ageless genie, and she becomes the vessel for vengeance against men who perpetrate evil in her village. A charming story, a moving and lyrical writing, but with a tragic end. This story sheds or traverses themes of societal issues experienced by little girls in certain parts of Africa. My guests, Mame Diene and Woppa Diallo, are husband and wife duo. Mame Diene is a humanitarian who is based in Pretoria. He is Senegalese. He is also a writer of speculative fiction. He is a spokesperson, francophone spokesperson for the African Speculative Fiction Society, and his short story and his works are published in numerous anthologies. He was nominated for the Nommo Awards, and his debut collection, Dark Moons Rising on a Starless Night, it was nominated for the 2019 Splatterpunk Award. Woppa Diallo is a lawyer who specializes in human rights, humanitarian action, and peace promotion. She's a feminist activist, and she founded, at the age of 15, she founded the Association pour le maintien des filles à de l'école, AMFE, in Senegal. And the mission of this foundation is to fight for fair access to education for girls, eradicate gender-based stereotypes, promote sexual and reproductive health, and the continued socialization of girl victims of gender-based violence. Without further ado, we go into the interview. Unfortunately, the first few seconds of this interview were cut off by technical hitches, but I'm sure that you will enjoy the rest of it. It's still just as engaging and as it was entertaining and enlightening for me, and I hope you enjoy it. In the description, I provide a link for you to follow Woppa Diallo's work through her foundation, and also a way for you to support her cause. And with that, we go into the interview. Please enjoy.
See from the community, the blame, the victim mentality that tends to be very prevalent, in most of the world, but especially in very conservative traditional areas. And some of the ways she was describing Matam, the Anyam villages, and how the geography played a part in women's oppression as well, and how it limits, and how the prevalence of gender-based violence, especially the incidences of sexual violence, limit girls' access to education, were what inspired me to write the story. I was working on a story with similar themes at the time, but I really wasn't getting anywhere because it's a story that can't really be told from the perspective of someone who has no experience in either addressing the issue or as a lived issue. But listening to Woppa's story, the sociological aspects particularly are what sparked the idea for Soul of Small Places. Once I had those ideas, I told Woppa, look, I'm going to write this story. And then she contributed some more elements that are related to her village more specifically. So the stone statue that serves as a thread through the story itself is an actual physical feature from her village. The story of the stone statue, as it is told locally, is a little different from the way I adapted it for the purposes of the narrative in the Soul of Small Places, but it's also a very real feature. So those elements came together into becoming driving forces in the narrative, and also allowed for the story to be very thematically focused on gender-based violence and the incidents on girls' education and the impact thereof. When it comes to love more specifically, well, I had just met Woppa maybe 10, 15 days before, and I was really, really trying to impress the girl. So, it's early feelings of love that got translated into the story. But I also wanted this to be a story that speaks to various aspects of communal love, of romantic love, of filial love, of love between siblings, and how all those things contribute to creating a character, to building up a person, and this was also a coming of age story, right? So it's a teenage story, and we've all been teenagers. We go in and out of crushes and fall in and out of love, almost on a whimsy sometimes. And so it was important to me that aspect of growing up was also translated into that. I remember telling someone in the early interviews that love is always the story, but that's kind of true in any kind of story. That's one thing that we can all relate to, and so it was important to me that while the story is dark, while the thematic is very violent and oppressive, there was something that shined through, that wasn't just horror or darkness, but also brought some light into what is otherwise a really dark narrative.
That's awesome. And I caught Whopper's smile when when you started talking about the timing of the I think we started smiling at the same time. Our teeth just shining and everything. But I'll just ask. I'm going. I'm going to take a second from you. Just a second from talking to you. Talk to Whopper now. Whopper, how did you feel when he presented this idea to you? I mean, he was trying to impress you and everything.
Qu'est-ce que je ressens quand tu dis que tu voulais m'impressionner?
Non, comment tu te sentais quand je t'ai dit que je voulais travailler sur cette idée?
Ben, moi, j'étais très contente. J'étais très contente puisque je me disais que il s'intéresse à ce que je fais et ce serait un moyen pour moi de pouvoir partager mon histoire, de pouvoir partager le vécu, le quotidien de ma communauté. Et c'est peut-être aussi une chance que plus c'est partagé, plus c'est connu et que peut-être des solutions pourront être proposées face à cette situation.
So she's saying that she was really happy when I told her about the idea, because it was important for her. She thought it was important for her that the story was told, that the lives and experiences of her community were shared, and that hopefully through the story, people could relate to the situation, and that solutions, that people could come up with solutions as to how to address the issue.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I really, I think I agreed with. I mean, there were so many dimensions to the response you gave about the making of the story itself, and especially how it needed to be true to the sensitivity of the issues that you were, also presenting in the story, and that really stood out. But I also wanted to, for anyone who hasn't read the story, this is a good time to really pick it up and read, especially if anything, pick on how we also, and rather how the story also sheds light on the moral or the norms, or the moral system in Africa, and where we see how Whopper's to be boyfriend had to go through, jump the hoops in order to win her love or the father's approval. That was what, that wasn't you, right? That wasn't you trying to impress the dad in any way. There was no shred of that autobiography in that story, was there?
No, no, not really. I mean, the character of Amadou just to be fair with you, usually when I write a story, I don't really plot things very much. I'm not a scripted writer. I don't outline when I write things. So this story, I started writing it. I did some research on her village specifically. So the backstory, for instance, Anyam Shudai, as it's presented, is slightly modified from something that I saw on Wikipedia, and I told Woppa about it. And interestingly enough, that was a backstory she didn't even know about her village. So there are things out there that you find because you really, you're starting to show interest in elements. But the character of Amadou, yeah, jumping through hoops to get to know her better, to get to impress her some. Um, maybe some of the shyness displayed, the fact that yeah, he's trying to get on her father's good side. Those are just things that are very typical, are very typical to everywhere, really. Think of that scene in Bad Boys 2, right? When Will Smith and Martin Lawrence are greeting the daughter's boyfriend at the door, and they're really trying to impress on him that he should really treat her right. Those things are true everywhere, but they're very specifically, I mean, probably truer in more conservative societies. So that is something that, I mean, to me, the important elements was the authenticity, right? The listening to Woppa talk about her work was so authentic that the story had to reflect that authenticity too, and that authenticity of sentiment and that authenticity of struggle. So sometimes in burgeoning relationships, and establishing those relationships a little bit more formally. But the character of Amadou just came up as part of the writing process. Essentially, what I do is when I start writing a story, especially a short story, I just start writing, and I write and I write and I write until I've gotten to a point where I feel like I've established the backbone for the story. And so Amadou came up as part of the natural process because, again, it's a coming of age story. So there was going to be a moment where there was going to have to be a boyfriend, but it wasn't really thought through at all. It just evolved organically as part of putting the story together.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'll go to touch a little bit more on your process. Just a few questions on the like a tangents on along the lines of your influences and your process, but a kind of a segue from this. I wanted to ask Woppa, having since winning, and this begs for me to point out that this story marks a milestone in the history of the Caine Prize for African writing, in that this is the first duo or collaborative win, especially by married couple. And having said that, my question to Woppa is: so, are you now a short story writer? I know your 9 to 5 is nine, or your 9 to 5, and even maybe even longer. What consumes you daily may be your humanitarian or your legal work. But are you now a short story writer? Are you now a writer? Is it something you want to pursue, whether collaboratively or individually?
Il demande si maintenant, après tout ça, est-ce que tu es quelqu'un qui écrit des histoires?
Non, toujours pas. Toujours pas. Je pense que je suis dans tellement de domaines que je vais éviter de partir un peu. Et puis, j'ai un écrivain qui est à côté.
She says no, 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 no. She's still not a short story writer or a story writer, a storyteller. But maybe she is a storyteller because it's the honesty behind her storytelling and how she related and translated all the other girls' experience that really put this together. But no, she's not a writer. She's also pulled in a lot of different directions, like you said, with the NGO work and the legal work. And she says, and I've got an author right next to me, so why would I even bother with it?
Those are high praises for you, man. Even for a husband.
Yeah. I lucked out, man. I definitely lucked out.
I mean, I try to take pictures. I parade myself as a hobbyist photographer on Instagram, but when you come home and your wife says, "Take a picture of me," You know, you're like, she's like, you call yourself a photographer? How do you take pictures like this? So I'm like, man, you know, you can't win it all. You can't win it all. But so if that comes from Woppa for you, thumbs up.
That's love. That's love right there. But I do want to expand a little bit on what you were saying and what I was, the way Rupa responded. It's because, I mean, you know, this was discussed with the Caine Prize people before the nomination.
Yeah.
They wanted to know whether this was actually a collaborative work of traditional co-authoring, meaning that two people got together to discuss the narrative, discuss the plot, discuss the elements, share different parts of the writing. And so we made it very clear that the writing was the work of one of the two of us. But that the inspiration and the background came from a very real life setting, physically, but also a very real experience in terms of the work and the gender-based violence. And to me, that was important. That's why I gave her co-author credits, is because the story could not have been written if I hadn't heard her voice speaking to the issue. If she didn't express those issues in such a powerful way. For instance, several times in the story it says, "Keep your little girls home," and that was something that she repeated when she was discussing the issue. She said, you know, people keep their little girls home, and it's always, you want to do that, but you can't keep your little girls home. And I remember being absolutely terrified listening to this. That struck a really powerful emotional chord. When I say, when in the story it says, you know, in Senegal you can usually see a house for miles because it's really deserted, right? So it's like open plains, but not in Matam because the geography, the topography is different, because the vegetation, the plants, and everything are different. Those are things that she said absolutely specifically. So some elements of her descriptions actually found their way into the story entirely untouched. And so to me, it was important to give her co-author credits because it also raises the question of what is co-authoring and what is co-creation. Um, like I said, Rupa might not be a story writer, but she is a storyteller. The difference is she doesn't tell fictional stories; she tells real life stories. And those real life stories can be absolutely horrifying without having to introduce a cannibal demon into it. And also, you know, it's a Fulani village. And I'm part of my background is Fulani, but it's not my most prominent background. So even the term sukunyo was something that I wasn't familiar with. But when I described the kind of monster that I wanted to introduce in the story, she said, "Oh yeah, no, the sukunyo," and I was like, "Okay, great. The monster's got a name now." So through the discussion on the world building, especially early on, none of this could have happened if I hadn't had this real life source. And I think too many at times authors want to take credit for a lot of ideas that and inspiration and research that they do in order to give their story a backbone. And sometimes that research and that inspiration comes from a real life person. And without that real life person, that wouldn't exist in such a way. So this was also an opportunity for us to discuss what, you know, the art, the act of creation is, how inception starts early on, and where you get that spark. And oftentimes, sometimes, you know, people see something on TV and that motivates them to write a story a certain way. The difference is this time there was a real life person who's a real life hero in her village, for doing the work that she does. And that's also why the character is called Woppa Diallo. Also because her name has a very specific meaning that also plays out into the story and how the character becomes what it becomes. But it was very important, really, really important, that contribution, even if it's not in the writing, in the plotting, in the choices, in the narrative, and how the story is written, that voice is still a driving power in how the story came out in the end.
I agree. I agree. And kudos to you. You really came through with that one. Thank you so much. And I think I just wanted to point out too, it seems like very natural or common trend. It's more especially in fantasy and science fiction genre to see a lot of collaborative work going on. And especially seeing as this actually toes the line of speculative fiction, it's almost a no, wouldn't you think, almost a no-brainer that the jury would sanction that submission itself as a collaborative work.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't ask the director at the time of the Caine, but I think the reason why they wanted to find out whether or not it was a single author's work or if it was a collaborative work is because all the other stories are written by single authors. So perhaps it's a bit of an unfair advantage if you have two minds working on the same project versus one mind. You understand? But it is true that you are seeing more and more collaborative works coming up. I mean, obviously, very recently, Good Omens, the Terry Pratchett,
Yep.
Neil Gaiman book that turned into an absolutely tremendous
Yep.
first season. I hear there's a second season in the making.
Yep. Oh, it's out. I
And
think it's out.
Terry Pratchett, huh?
I think it's out. I think second
The
season of
second
Good
season
Omens.
might be out already.
Yeah, I think so.
I need to catch up on that. I definitely need to catch up on that. I just recently found out that The Expanse, which is probably my favorite science fiction TV show of all time, I started watching that a few years late. Because when I first watched it, I think I wasn't in a place where I could actually really appreciate it. But the second time around, I was just glued to my TV screen for days. I got spinal surgery in the meantime, and all I could tell the nurses was, I really want to get back because I got to finish season 3 of The Expanse. Don't want to learn how to walk properly after spinal surgery? Yeah, sure, but I really want to get back to watching The Expanse. And I just found out that James S.A. Corey is actually a duo of authors. So yeah, I mean, we're going to be seeing a lot more of that, and it's really great. I think that collaborative minds, because I find that writing is a very personal process.
Yeah.
It would be very hard for me, at least now, to work collaboratively with anybody. But yeah, I think as far as the Caine decision was, it was to make sure that there was no unfairness in the process. And perhaps we'll see more of that in the future. Perhaps we will. Other awards, they just consider the work as the work. But again, maybe this time, because it's specifically a platform for authors, and many of us were are relative unknowns by the time we hit the Caine nomination, that it is important to make sure that the process is even across the different authors that are nominated. So yeah. Definitely something that I think we're going to see more of in the future.
That's awesome.
But again, but,
Yep.
but again, to me, Sophie, sorry, I think it's also about making sure that you give due credit to the people who should receive credit for your work.
Exactly. Exactly.
It would have been absolutely disgusting for me, from a personal perspective, to just appropriate Woppa's experience entirely. And also, again, the reason why I chose her name for the character, because I thought you have to pay homage to the people who allow you to put together the work you put together.
I agree. I was even going to make a note of that. Even for, and I would even say that, and this especially is in the along academic path, or the path of academic writing. They are making a case to account for any attributions or credits to AI intervention or AI contributions, whether by research, by edits, or even chunks of writing
Mhm.
itself. So it's
Yeah.
just fair, to be for people to, or for writers to attribute or to credit sources or credit inspirations where due.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I
that.
mean, I was actually that reminds me of something that a French Algerian author said when I interviewed him for my column in Strange Horizons. He was talking about the book called Osama that was written by an American, who was based in Paris, living in the 16th district, so one of the wealthier districts in the city. And when they asked him, "How could you write a book, you as a white American living in a rich neighborhood, that speaks so truly to the experience of um, a young Maghrebian, a second generation French kid born and raised in the projects?" He said, "I did my research." He spoke to literally dozens of kids from the projects to make sure he understood the perspective and could translate it in a way that was authentic. And you don't get that authenticity out of nowhere. You get it from people. And like you said, in academia, you have to give credits, you have to write your sources, and sometimes, and too many times, I think authors are really quick to put the writing, the act of having written the story ahead of the act of processing the story and putting it together. And it's really, really important that like you said, that you give space to the people who allowed you to be that authentic, and who allowed you to speak through their voice, essentially.
I agree. I agree. Thanks so much for that. I'm just going to touch on your sense, or your perspectives on speculative fiction. This could have been very easily any other kind of story. Why tell it as or, choose that angle to treat the subject?
Okay, that's a very a good question, and thank you, Sochi. Hold on a second. Maybe, Woppa, do you want to say something about ce dont on parlait avant, du processus, du fait d'avoir la reconnaissance de ces choses-là?
Je pas compris.
Non, c'est, par exemple, on parlait de l'acte de création, du fait que je ne pouvais pas m'approprier ta voix sans te faire de toi le carré le personnage, et qu'il faut reconnaître aussi les sources d'où viennent les choses, parce que parfois les gens ont une voix et ont une importance, et certaines personnes se l'approprient, quoi.
Ok, mais je pense que pour moi, c'est de l'honnêteté intellectuelle. Je n'étais pas obligée de me mentionner là-dessus, parce qu'on voit que beaucoup d'histoires, beaucoup de choses, beaucoup de réalisations viennent de quelqu'un, de quelque part, mais que ces personnes-là ne sont pas mentionnées et que leur voix ne ressortent pas, leur personnage ne ressortent pas. Donc, c'est pour moi, je reconnais cette honnêteté intellectuelle avec laquelle tu as agi, et j'en suis vraiment ravie.
So just to touch on what we were saying before, just to get Wopa's perspective, she thinks it's really a matter of intellectual honesty, and that too often what you get are the voices and the personalities of people, and then the character and what they represent, that again is appropriated by somebody else, and that they're not given due credit. She says that I had no obligation to make her co-author at all. But she really appreciated it, because it's important that the reality shines through the fiction. And that's probably a good segue into your question. I've always written speculative fiction. That's always been my background in terms of literature. I mean, I've read a lot of realism, but from an early age, what we grew up with in my household were myth and legends, Hindu myth and legends, Celtic myth and legends, a lot of Arthurian myth and legends, African myth and legends, Asian myth and legends. Both of my parents are massive, massive science fiction buffs. So Dune, for instance, was one of the first movies that I remember seeing. My parents were like, "You got to see this," and I was super, super young. I was really not ready to see David Lynch's version of Dune. I remember one time we were coming home from shopping, and they saw that Cocoon 2 was out, and they were like, "Wait, there's a 2?" They parked the car, and next thing you know, we're in the movie theater. And so that's kind of always been like my background. I tried writing more realistic stuff. It doesn't work for me. Even when I start doing something realistic, at some point or another is going to turn into something speculative. But I think in relation to A Soul in Small Places, some of the elements, I wanted this to be an African story, like an honestly African story. And obviously because it is set in such a very specific place. And then when Woppa told me the story of the statue, then that mystical thread became something became really anchored into the narrative. And then the research on Anyam Shodai itself, how the village came to be, was also profoundly mystical. It's I've said it before, like it's in African cosmology or in African reality, really. What would be considered supernatural is actually considered as very natural, right? The presence of spirits, the influence of ancestors, the different elements that allow nature to be are not necessarily natural or wouldn't be natural to a more Cartesian mind, but they also help to explain the world in a very specific way. So in order for this to be an African story, it also had to be a slightly otherworldly story. But that otherworldliness had to be a natural part of how the story evolves, of how the characters view their own reality, so that it doesn't come off as being an add-on. And that contributed to the fluidity of the narrative that you mentioned earlier, was that it's not me necessarily, and my family is Senegalese, so growing up, that was always a part of how my father specifically, because my father is Senegalese, my mother is French, she's half Senegalese. My father specifically would tell us things. You talk to him, and there's always like a part of, well, you never really know, you never really know. 5 p.m. Like, a moment in the story is that part where, sorry, the kid is going nuts. The kid is going crazy. But a part of the story at one moment, the moment where things start getting darker is when it's time for the spirits. And that's around twilight. And growing up, whenever we were in Senegal at twilight, my father would always take us in. 5:30 p.m. we could not be outside anymore. Absolutely not on the beach, because that's the time when there's a very specific spirit who wanders the beach, and so you have to be home. It made no sense to us. Like, we were just like, look, we would just want to keep having fun with our friends, but every day 5:30 you have to be home. You have to be home because you never know. The spirit is out. He's a mischievous guy. Nothing could happen. Something could happen. You never know. You know. So that became so that was really important to the story. It would have been a speculative fiction story anyway, because that's my natural tendency. But if it has to be an African story, then you can't really separate the supernatural from the natural, the real from the unreal, your life from the elements around you.
Awesome. I mean, that's so true. I remember my parents would tell me, okay, we have a very common myth about mommy water. So
Yeah.
parents would tell you, don't go. We don't have water where we come from. Not meaning we don't have water as a resource. We just don't have waterways where people might have learned how to swim. So please don't go near the water if or any waterway trying to
Mm.
swim or even delving into the depths, or otherwise mommy water will take you away or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Now, just to
that's
touch a little bit more. So, sorry, you're breaking up. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please.
that's fine. No, you heard me. That was all. That was all.
No, just something else that Wopa said at one of the panels during the Africa Rights at the British Library in London. She was talking about how a lot of things are explained mystically, even in her community as well. I mean, this is again, I said even in her community, but obviously it's an African community. But she was talking about like a lot of the interdicts that girls have to face. And so, c'était quoi le truc sur l'aiguille que tu disais? Faut pas utiliser des aiguilles après lui.
Ouais, que c'était pas bon, que c'était ça amenait le mauvais sort, mais en expliquant, il faut juste savoir qu'il n'y avait pas de lumière autant et c'était pour éviter qu'on se pique ou qu'on se blesse.
So for instance, she gave this example like there's like a prohibition about using needles or sharp objects, especially for women after at nightfall. And the reason that is given is that if you do that, it's going to draw some kind of evil spirit. The fact is, it's just dark, and you're going to hurt yourself. But everything, even small things, are explained, are given like a bit of a mystical portent that you don't find in other places.
That's so true. And we also have where they say, "Don't look in the mirror in the night," or "Don't whistle in the night." You call spirits. Things like that.
I haven't heard that one. I haven't heard that.
Oh, really? Oh,
that's interesting.
It's common in Nigeria. Don't whistle in the night.
Okay.
Then don't go to the mirror. Don't look in the mirror. Then we also have so there's also the how they say superstition about hearing things running on the roof. Or people spirits calling your name in the window. Try to stay away from.
Yeah.
But,
some of those things I'm guessing. Some of those things I'm guessing are just we share a lot of the same. Some of the same. I don't want to call them superstitions, I guess, for lack of a better word. Or other types of rationalization, probably, because all of our countries were at some point or another part of the same empires, right? Like the cross-cultural framework of West Africa is actually, besides the fact that there are hundreds of different languages and little local traditions that are different, they're really broad sweeps culturally that we all share. So it's really not surprising that sometimes you hear something in one village and you hear the same thing in another village 500 miles away, because those things, it's like those things find their way into everything.
That's so true. That's so true. What would you say are besides these cosmological anecdotes or stories and influences, who by way of writers or writings or books and maybe movies would you say are your biggest influences? That's both you and Woppa.
Wow. So basically, yeah. C'est chose, c'est la question sur ce que tu lis, ce qui t'inspire. I'll let Woppa answer that one first on what she's reading and what inspires her.
Alors, je lis beaucoup de la littérature africaine, notamment des femmes.
She reads a lot of African literature, especially women.
Et sur le féminisme.
About feminism.
Les femmes, le pouvoir des femmes, le matriarcat.
Women's the power that women have in matriarchy.
Et là, je suis en train de lire le livre de Zara Ali sur le féminisme musulman.
And right now she's reading Zara Ali's book on Islamic feminism or Muslim feminism.
Oh, that's interesting.
Me, isn't it, huh? Me, the book, I mean, I read a lot of Stephen King growing up. That's probably why I write a lot of horror, because I read just tons of Stephen King. He was my favorite author for a long time. And I think the Dark Tower series still shines to me like something that's like this unattainable goal in terms of writing. The Dark Tower, especially book 7, to me is just, it's not a book, it's a symphony. It's absolutely glorious. But the book that made me want to be a writer is Michael Crichton's Timeline. I remember reading it, and it was just so vivid that I realized instantly why every single one of his books turns into a movie, because it was like reading a movie. And I thought that's the kind of immediacy I would like to emulate in my writing. Something that is so gripping that the moment you read it, you see it. So it's not just you having to build up the words in your mind to create a painting. It's the painting of 1,000 words, right? That's what I'm shooting for. But in terms of writing, to me, like perfect writing sits somewhere at the crossroads between Katsuo Ishiguro, Terry Pratchett, Iceberg Slim, and Shirley Jackson. Um, the humor, the grittiness, the ambiance, and just the of intimacy in Katsuo Ishiguro, the atmosphere in Shirley Jackson, the humor and wittiness in Terry Pratchett, and just the gritty reality of Iceberg Slim. If you manage to put all of those four things together, you have technically the perfect narrative, because you're hitting on all of these different elements that allow for a story to really have a body. Yeah. That's who I would name as my inspirations mostly.
Yeah, I know I've heard of Michael Crichton's timeline. There's been a reference to it in one of the YouTube reviewers' videos. I never really thought to check it out, but now that you mentioned it, I guess this is universe telling me something. So I'll definitely look out for that one.
I really don't know if it's his best book or not. Honestly, I just remember that that's the first book of his that I read. Unfortunately, the movie for writing a book that is so cinematic, it's unfortunate that the movie turned out to miss the mark. But that's also the difference between film and writing. You can go into a lot of depths with writing that you can't necessarily translate into film, and that's also why everybody's always disappointed with every single new iteration of Dune, because the books are so introspective. And how can you translate such introspection in a 3-hour blockbuster or 12-hour blockbuster, the way it's turning out to be?
Sure, that's true. And this is a good segue into my next question, which is, what do you think is the most important element of a good short story?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? You said, what do you think is
Yeah, sure.
most important in?
The most important element of a good short story.
The most important elements of a good story. Um, that's a good question. Well, as a horror writer, I think it's managing to create, and I think that's why Shirley Jackson is definitely a goddess or a god, so we don't genderize everything. Is that her books just and her stories just set such an atmosphere. It's like you're in a horrific place, even if it wasn't a horror story. The horrific elements are interesting, but you don't need gore. You don't need excessive gore. Like for instance, I'm not a fan of the Saw movies and all those that rely on just like sheer brutality to get a reaction out of people. I'm really more interested in the House on Haunted Hill. We've always lived in the castle, because it doesn't matter. And actually, the way I started the story, my name is Woppa Diallo. That's a tribute to Shirley Jackson, and my name is Mary Cat, and we've always lived in the castle, because she, in one paragraph, manages to get you a great sense of who the character is, and then on top of that, the oddities that are going to lace the story, and from the first paragraph on, you are set into a place where you know that you should expect the unexpected, because she's managed to set the tone. And to me, that is probably the most important thing, is managing to create a tone that allows the reader to be in a different reality for the time of the reading. While you are in a fictional place, that fictional place has a cohesiveness, that you feel that you are wading through different kinds of waters, new and uncharted different kinds of waters, and that those waters might drown you at any moment. And if you manage to do that, I feel that even if your story is mediocre, you're still going to win your audience over, because you've managed to give them a sense of this is going to stay with them even more down, or the story down, um, or the tablet down, whatever it is you read on these days. And that's really where it is to me. You're creating an atmosphere, you're creating a tone, and you're developing a feeling.
Awesome. Just one last question, and I'm going to spin this for you and for Woppa as well. And that is, how do you make time to write? I know you work as a communication specialist right now for the United Nations in South Africa. How do you make time to write? And for Woppa, how do you make time for anything else but work as a legal practitioner?
You forgot the one other variable, which is our 2-year-old,
I
who
haven't
just takes up
I haven't
all the
forgotten.
space that we have outside of that. She is probably like the one single thing that beautifully steals our time. But I'll let Woppa answer first. Alors Woppa, comment est-ce que tu arrives à trouver du temps pour faire quoi que ce soit avec toutes les choses avec lesquelles tu es
Je ne sais pas franchement comment est-ce que même je trouve du temps pour faire mais je pense que c'est toujours le résultat qui me motive et c'est beaucoup quand même de temps de sommeil, de sacrifice, de temps de repos, de sacrifice. Et puis, mais oui, mais on trouve toujours le temps.
She doesn't know herself how she finds time. And to her, it's about like the outcome. It's about what you manage to do with your time, and how worthwhile it is to sacrifice hours of sleep, hours of rest, to get things done. Like for instance, right now, she's taking English classes. She also got funding for a project in Senegal for her NGO that is running right now. So she's busy coordinating that. She's also getting called for consultancies by different NGOs. People are inviting her to meetings left and right internationally to advocate for women's rights and women's education. So yeah, she's like constantly, and the kid that you're hearing stomping in the background over there. So she's always constantly doing something, and it's not just that. She also gets phone calls from people in the village who have issues, and who need her help. Girls who are going through traumatic experiences, and she takes the time to listen to them. And really empathize with them, and it takes a massive emotional toll, but she still does it. Because it's important that someone is there to support survivors, support victims, and to help them believe that they're worthwhile, and that there's something for them. So, Woppa, like I said, Woppa is the hero of the story. In the story, she turns into a monster, but also a very self-conscious monster. Thank God, she doesn't. She's not a monster at all. Quite the contrary. Quite the opposite. But it is all-consuming, just like the character in the story. That work, that fight is really all-consuming. As for me, look, I was writing much less after the kid was born, and I hadn't written much at all for maybe like the 6 or 7 months up to the Caine nomination. And I've only started writing again a couple of weeks ago. So, but it's when I was in New York, it was a lot easier because I had roughly 2 hours commuting on the MTA every day. So just to zone out of the utter misery that is being on the train every morning, I would just whip out my cell phone. I write on my cell phone. I used to write on Android, now I write on my iPhone, so I can always write on the go. I was flying back from Zambia yesterday. I was writing on my phone on the plane. I used to write on the subway. So, and I'm doing pretty good right now. I'm averaging maybe 1,000 words a day, more or less, working on this project. It's intense. I do it maybe in the 30 minutes to a couple of hours before going to bed. If I can squeeze time earlier in the day, I write whenever I can. I write whenever I can, basically. But usually, again, my process is really natural. If I have an idea, I'm going to find time to put that idea together, even if there's other constraints. Even if there's Yasmina over there just lurking somewhere in a corner, waiting to spring all manners of hell on the two of us.
I wish you guys more grace. Oh my God. Yes, I have three, so I can understand. I can understand. But somehow we find time for this kind of for the things that we need to do. And I can't be any happier for you guys. How you finding joy
Thank you.
in both lives. And you can send. I would be very happy to share any link, Whopper, if you have any link for any of your NGO endeavors which you would like people to support. I would be happy to feature it in the description so people can check it out and see what ways they can help support your cause. So please let me know.
Oui, oui, je vous enverrai des liens du site et puis les projets. D'ailleurs, nous lançons une campagne tout de suite à 20h. Nous avons une campagne que nous devons lancer à 20h sur l'accès des femmes aux instances de décision dans le milieu de la santé.
So
D'accord.
she'll be sharing some links. She'll be sharing some links, links to the website, to the AMFE website, where you're going to find all our past projects. I say her past projects. I contribute a little bit to some of the stuff, so all the past projects, all the materials, educational tools that were developed by the NGO, AMFE is starting a campaign on women's access to decision making in health, in sexual reproductive health, tonight at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Dakar. 8 p.m. Dakar. So that's 2,200 hours here. And this is 7-hour difference, I think, with the East Coast with daylight saving hours. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. There's a lot of things coming.
Awesome. Awesome.
Woppa also wants to mention that a portion of the earnings of the proceeds from the Caine Prize are going to getting sexual reproductive health materials for some of the villages that surround the Anyams, especially the most remote villages. So we're working together with an NGO called Kitamba Women, based in Dakar, to procure those things. So period pads, period panties that are sustainable and renewable and can be used up to 18 months. So we are in the process of procuring that right now, and we're going to be doing the distributing on March 8th for International Women's Day 2024.
That's great news. Congratulations. That's great. That's just wonderful. Thank you so much. Ma'am,
Thank you.
Woppa, thank you so much for your time. I know I took more than I asked, but your generosity means so much to me, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, so does your interest. Thank you so much for reaching out, and thank you for the patience in waiting for us to find time to do this. So it's truly wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right.